Hello and welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Oliver Twist. Chapter 8, A Dying Woman's Secret. It was a snowy, bitter cold night, and Mrs. Corney, who now ran the workhouse where Oliver was born, sat with Mr. Bumble before a cheerful fire drinking tea. It's hard weather, Mrs. Corney, and all the people in the parish complain about not having enough food and coals. People are selfish. Here we are taking care of these paupers, and they're always asking for more. Mrs. Corney enjoyed these visits from Mr. Bundle, he being a single man and she being a widow for 25 years. Mr. Bumble finished his tea, wiped his mouth, and suddenly jumped up and kissed the lady on the lips. "Stop, Mr. Bumble, or I shall scream," she cried. But before she had a chance to scream, a knock came at the door and an ugly old woman put her head in. "If you please, Mrs. Corney," she said, "old Sally is going fast. She says she has something important to tell you before she dies." Mrs. Corney was annoyed at being disturbed with her gentleman caller, but she excused himself. That should be what she excused herself, and hurried off. Old Sally laid in a bare attic room with a dim light burning near the bed. She was twisted with age and trembling in pain. "Doubt whether she'll last 2 more hours," said the 2 attendants who were stirring the coals in the fireplace. "Listen, you old hags," snapped Mrs. Corney. "I can't waste my time waiting for all these sick people in this place to die." She turned to leave the room where the figure on the bed pulled herself upright and stretched out her arms. "Don't go," came a weak voice. "Come over here and let me whisper in your ear. I must tell you something before I die." Mrs. Corney pushed the other old women out the door and went to the bedside. "Now listen," began the dying woman. "In this very room, I once nursed a pretty young thing who was brought in on her feet, cut and bleeding, and her clothes covered with dirt. She gave birth to a baby boy and then died. The year was, I think—" "Never mind the year," said Mrs. Corney impatiently. "What about the young woman?" The woman on the deathbed moaned, and her arms darted around wildly. "I remember now," she cried fiercely. "I robbed that young woman. Before her body was cold, I stole it." "Stole what, for God's sake?" "I stole the only thing that poor creature had. She could have spent it for food or clothes, but she saved it and kept it safe. And it was pure gold." "Gold?" Now Mrs. Corney shared old Sally's excitement. "Go on, who was the mother? What was she say?" "She asked me to keep it safe for her. She trusted me, but she is dead, and that child may be dead too. If he is, it's my fault. The gold could have saved his life. He would have been treated better if they had known." "Known what?" asked Mrs. Corney, who was really puzzled now. "Speak, speak." "The baby boy looked so much like his mother that I could never forget it whenever I saw his face. The poor girl, she was so young." The dying woman was out of breath and fell back against the pillow. "Speak," shouted Mrs. Corney. "Speak now before it's too late." Old Sally struggled to speak. Her voice was very faint. "The mother whispered to me that if her baby lived, the day might come when he would not feel so ashamed to have his mother's name mentioned. I pray to heaven that someone has befriended the poor child. He was so alone." "What was the boy's name?" asked Mrs. Corney, who was already beside herself with frustration. "They called him Oliver, and the gold I stole, I took it to a pawn." The old woman's voice trailed off. She grabbed the sheet with both hands, muttered some strange sounds in her throat, and fell back lifeless upon the bed. "Stone dead and nothing to tell after all," muttered Mrs. Corney. She took a small piece of paper out of the dead woman's hands and walked away, in disgust, calling the attendants to come in and take care of the body. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. See you later.